On the morning of September 18, 1971, 4-year-old Peter Graham vanished from Maumee Bay State Park just minutes after being seen playing beneath a large oak tree, amid the chilly lake air and a thin mist that had not yet lifted. There was no cry, no drag marks, no witness who saw him leave the park. The weeks-long search yielded only absolute silence. No physical evidence, no direction of travel, no explanation for Peter's final 8 minutes. Decades later, an old garage in Texas was demolished, and from beneath rotted floorboards emerged a wooden box containing a child's striped shirt, a map marked with a route from Ohio to Arizona, and a journal written in the handwriting of a man believed to have died in 1994. But it was the scrawled entries in that journal describing details that matched the moment Peter disappeared down to the second that forced investigators to confront a horrifying question. Had the perpetrator ever truly left our lives, or had he simply hidden in the cracks of America for the past 52 years? Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. That Saturday morning, September 18, 1971, Maumee Bay State Park in Toledo, Ohio, wore the peaceful look of early fall, with the sun not yet fully risen and a thin mist still clinging to every blade of grass. The lake breeze from Lake Erie blew in, cold and persistent, carrying the scent of fresh water mixed with the damp, mossy smell of the rocky shore, producing the steady sound of small waves gently lapping at the edge. The park was almost empty at that hour. Only a few families out for an early walk, a maintenance worker checking trash cans along the paths, and the distant sound of a dog barking. The Graham family had arrived early to avoid the weekend crowds, spreading a picnic blanket on a flat patch of ground between the lawn and the edge of the woods. Peter Graham, the 4-year-old boy with soft blonde hair and bright brown eyes, was wearing a red and blue striped t-shirt and carrying the metal toy car he always brought to the park. He ran around the nearby oak trees, pushing the little car along the ground while talking to himself, his laughter blending with the wind and adding to the serene scene. Emily, his 7-year-old sister, was helping their mother set out the food and occasionally looked up to see where Peter had run off to. The sun began to peek over the horizon, its light slanting through the mist and casting a soft, pale, golden glow across the lawn. Around 8:14 a.m., a middle-aged woman walking her gray-furred dog passed by the cluster of oaks. She slowed her pace for a few seconds when she saw Peter leaning against the trunk of a large oak, facing toward the parking lot as if trying to see something in the distance. The boy was about 20 meters from his family, but still within sight, if an adult looked carefully. The woman saw no stranger near the child, but the scene did not alarm her. The park in the early morning was always safe and quiet, so she simply smiled faintly and continued her walk with the dog. No one knew that would be the last time anyone saw Peter. Less than a minute later, Emily turned to call Peter back for breakfast. The family estimated that interval at about 30 to 45 seconds, just long enough to be distracted by opening the food containers and a brief argument with their mother about the blanket shifting in the wind. When Emily turned back toward the oak where Peter had been standing, she was immediately horrified to see her little brother was no longer there. Initial confusion quickly turned to panic as she ran to the tree, scanned the wet grass around it, and shouted Peter's name. Peter's mother jumped to her feet, eyes darting in every direction, toward the woods, down to the lake, then back to the parking lot. But all she heard was the wind whistling through the treetops and the indifferent repetition of the lake waves. There were no running footsteps, no child's cry, no sign that Peter had headed down a trail or toward the water's edge. Everything happened so fast that no one had time to comprehend what had just occurred. Within minutes, the peaceful morning atmosphere was torn apart by chaos. Peter's father ran straight to the parking lot, opening the doors of nearby cars to check if the boy was hiding and playing, while his mother headed in the opposite direction toward the woods, calling her son's name with a voice that grew shakier by the second. After nearly 5 minutes of fruitless searching, the Graham family rushed to the payphone near the park's ranger station. The mother, gasping for breath, spoke to the operator in a voice almost choking with emotion. "My son is gone. He's just gone." And then the urgent report went out over the radio waves. "A 4-year-old boy has gone missing at Maumee Bay." Just 12 minutes after Peter's mother's emergency call, two Lucas County Sheriff's Office patrol cars sped through the Maumee Bay State Park gate, their warning lights cutting long streaks of light across the thinning morning mist. The atmosphere in the park had already changed dramatically from moments earlier. In place of the early morning, peace was chaos, desperate shouts calling to one another, and hurried footsteps on the still wet grass. Without delay, the officer in charge of the scene ordered a 500-meter radius lockdown around the large oak tree based on the principle that in just a few minutes, a 4-year-old child could not walk farther than that on his own. Orange marker tape was stretched in multiple layers, completely blocking all exits from the central area. Everyone not part of the search team was asked to move out of the zone to avoid disturbing potential evidence on the grass. Investigators immediately began the critical first step: reconstructing the window 8. The time frame from 4 minutes before to 4 minutes after the moment Emily turned back and could no longer see Peter. This was the golden window, short enough that the child's ability to wander far was limited, yet long enough for a stranger to act without drawing attention. One officer spread a large topographic map of the park across the hood of a patrol car. On the map, they marked the spot where Peter was last seen, according to the witness: the trunk of the large oak tree, about 20 meters from the Graham family's picnic area on the lawn. From there, they drew 4 possible directions: 3 narrow trails leading deeper into the woods, and 1 wider path toward the parking lot. Within this area, the wind from the lake was blowing strongly from the northeast, potentially erasing scents and complicating tracking. While the coordination team built the diagram, another group of officers conducted rapid interviews, quick on-scene questioning to gather fresh memories before they could be distorted by stress or unconscious suggestion. The first witness questioned was the woman walking her dog, the last person to see Peter standing safely. She described it clearly. The boy was leaning against the oak trunk, holding his toy car, his head slightly tilted toward the parking lot. She saw no one near Peter, but she also could not be certain if anyone was on the right side of her view because the large tree blocked it. At that moment, Peter appeared normal, showing no signs of fear or wanting to run off. The second witness was a 10-year-old boy riding his bike, who had unintentionally passed the Eastern Trail area. He said he saw something bright moving behind the cluster of trees, but he wasn't sure if it was Peter or sunlight reflecting off someone's clothing. When asked to recall the direction the shadow moved, he hesitated and could not give a definite answer. This was the first inconsistency. The third witness was the park maintenance worker who had been checking trash cans near the parking lot a few minutes before Peter vanished. He reported seeing a tall man in dark clothing standing next to a vehicle, possibly an old truck or SUV. But he did not see Peter nearby, nor did he know when the man arrived or left. 3 statements, 3 different directions of movement. Investigators immediately recognized the problem. Peter's direction in those final 60 seconds was completely inconsistent. This made the window 8 diagram even more crucial. They used stakes driven directly into the ground to mark each position, calculated the distance a 4-year-old could cover in 45 seconds, then cross-referenced it with lines of sight obstructed by trees, bushes, and low-lying dips that could cause witnesses to misinterpret what they saw. Once the temporary diagram was complete, the search teams were immediately divided into 3 groups. Lake team, checking the entire shoreline, trails leading down to the water, and rocky areas along the edge. Woods team, sweeping the 3 V-shaped trails from close to deep. Trail team, handling the narrow eastern route, where the bike-riding boy's statement suggested unusual movement. K9 units were brought in, but the strong lake wind blowing inland made holding a scent difficult, an obstacle the investigators could not overcome. Still, they started the dogs at Peter's last known position, hoping to pick up even a short trajectory. No one on the search teams discovered clear physical evidence at that point. No toy, no scrap of fabric, no distinct footprints. Everything remained loose suspicions, conflicting observations, and the eerie silence of the woods right beside the lawn where Peter had once stood. About 18 minutes after the lockdown, as the trail team fanned out deeper into the eastern route, the radio suddenly crackled with urgent, heavy breathing. Dispatch, we found something, possibly related. Repeat, possibly related to the child. No one at the scene knew what it was, but everyone felt the same thing. This was the moment that would change the entire investigation. The eastern woods of Maumee Bay grew unnaturally quiet as the Lucas County Sheriff's officers moved in along the direction the trail team had just reported over the radio. The lake wind blew harder through the canopy, making the oak leaves rustle as if trying to conceal something beneath their shade. One officer knelt at the edge of the trail where the thick grass was pressed down in a long, relatively straight line. He ran his hand lightly over the surface, feeling the lingering moisture, then shone his flashlight close despite the daylight being bright enough to see clearly. That grass mark was not a footprint, not the trace of an adult walking across, but a drag mark. A light object had been pulled through here horizontally, not deep enough to create a groove, but enough to show it was not natural. The grass was not twisted or broken, just pushed aside as if swept by something with a relatively soft surface. The officers quickly discussed possibilities: clothing, a jacket, a large piece of fabric, or a child's soft item. None of it matched the description of anything Peter had with him, but no one jumped to conclusions. One officer used a rubber tape measure to estimate the width of the drag mark, his expression tense as he realized the force was not strong enough for a heavy object. Something weighing 10 to 20 pounds could produce a similar mark, but it was not enough to confirm it was Peter, nor to rule out other possibilities. While everyone focused on the drag mark, a few meters away, another officer bent close to the ground and called out. On the wet grass, two distinct sets of footprints were clearly visible, despite being distorted by moisture. One small print with a foot length consistent with a 3 to 5-year-old child, and a much larger one with the deep impression characteristic of an adult male. The two types overlapped in some sections and separated in others, making it difficult to determine the chronological order. If the small prints were Peter's, it meant he had run in here before vanishing completely from sight. But the size did not exactly match the size 9C shoes his parents described, particularly the slightly inward-turned toe, a detail absent from descriptions of Peter's gait. That caused the investigators to fall silent for a few seconds, because if they were not Peter's, then whose child did they belong to? On that early morning, Maumee Bay had few children in the area near the wood's edge. Those present were mostly near the lake or the western picnic area, far from where Peter disappeared. The existence of mismatched small footprints opened an unexpected line of speculation. There was a possibility another child had been with an adult in this area, or worse, might have been brought through here earlier, making the nature of the disappearance far more complicated. One officer moved deeper and spotted a small yellow plastic object wedged between two dew-covered blades of grass. He picked it up with specialized tongs and immediately placed it in a nylon evidence bag to avoid contamination. The plastic piece was curved at one corner with a slightly rough surface, possibly part of a toy or children's item. When the team leader asked, the Graham family confirmed Peter had no yellow plastic items at all, especially nothing he brought that morning. The investigators exchanged glances. The plastic did not belong to Peter, yet it appeared very close in time and location to his disappearance. Combined with the drag mark and the mismatched small footprints, the possibility of a second child passing through here became far more significant. No one dared say it aloud, but everyone understood this could completely change the scope and nature of the case. One officer measured soil depth and recorded moisture levels at each spot to determine when the footprints were made. If the small prints were fresh, they could be related to this morning. If older, they would help rule out the theory of a second child being brought through at the same time as Peter's disappearance. However, the ground's dampness from overnight dew made every measurement unreliable. The drag mark was examined in the same way. One line extended about 4 meters from the wood's edge toward the narrow trail. Given the light direction and sun position, nothing natural would create such a straight drag axis. One officer timed a simulation. If an adult dragged a light object or led another child who was being forced along, they could produce a similar mark in about 10 seconds. That fit within the 45-second window when Emily was not looking at Peter. Yet no one had seen an adult leading a small child away from the area. There was no crying or calling out. The strong lake wind blowing northeast pushed sound from the woods backward and could have prevented it from reaching witnesses on the lawn at all. The officers tested sound by having one person stand deeper on the trail and shout. After just a few meters, The call was shredded by the wind and nearly vanished. This weakened the assumption that an abducted child would necessarily cry out loudly enough to be heard. Every factor, terrain, wind, moisture, and timing, opened the possibility that Peter could have been taken into the woods, along the narrow path, without anyone hearing or seeing clearly. The officers continued following the direction of the drag mark and the two sets of footprints. The deeper they went, the denser the woods became, with interlocking canopies blocking light and making the trail appear darker than its mere tens of meters from the lawn, a change enough to cause witnesses to misinterpret movement. After about 7 meters, the small footprints gradually disappeared, while the large ones appeared in a few more sections before abruptly stopping in an area covered with dry leaves. The drag mark ended right after, with no further signs of movement. It was at that point that one officer raised the radio to his mouth. His voice instinctively lowered. Something's not right here. If this was the adult's path, what did he stop here for? The officers began scanning a smaller radius around the drag mark's endpoint with the naked eye, using probes to check soft soil. Everything remained quiet, with no sign of anything dropped. But the shared feeling among the investigation team was unmistakable. This was not Peter's path. And it was not the path of just one person either. Outside the woods, the sun was rising more clearly, sharpening the contrast of the shadows between the oak trunks. While the investigation team was still marking the drag mark's endpoint, one of the officers farther ahead called out, "More signs over here. Everyone come this way." Footsteps immediately rushed in that direction. What they were about to see would send the investigation down an entirely different branch. The officers gathered around the eastern trail area, where the unusual traces were beginning to show that the disappearance no longer resembled a child simply wandering off. The command team decided they had to lock down all the statements collected that morning to prevent memory distortions that could occur in just a few hours. The 3 witnesses were brought back to the exact positions they had been standing at the critical moment, not far from the large oak tree. The woman walking her dog was the first to be asked to describe everything she saw again. She pointed out the spot where she had passed by, then gestured toward the oak. Right where Peter was standing, turned toward the parking lot, his striped t-shirt vivid in her memory. She said she only saw the boy for a few seconds, long enough to notice he was intently looking at something farther away, but not long enough to recall precisely whether anyone was behind him or to the sides. Her dog had shown no unusual reaction, no growling or pulling on the leash, so she had no suspicions. Her calm demeanor helped the investigators establish her initial line of sight with relative accuracy. Next, the 10-year-old boy on the bike was asked to stand again on the narrow trail where he had ridden past. He looked around for a few seconds before pointing to a bright patch in the woods. "I remember seeing something bright flash up over there." When an officer showed him the description of the color of Peter's shirt for comparison, he paused. "No, I think it was solid red. Not striped." The officers exchanged glances, but no one doubted it anymore. The boy had misremembered the color. The bright spot he saw was very likely just sunlight filtering through a gap between 2 tree trunks, or a reflection off metal from some maintenance worker's equipment. This weakened the assumption that Peter had run toward the woods. The man mentioned in the maintenance worker's statement now became the factor most in need of clarification. The worker had been standing about 60 meters from the parking lot, at a point with a wide enough view to observe anyone appearing. When asked to point out the location of the man smoking, he honestly described a man around 6 feet tall, wearing dark clothing, standing next to a large vehicle he couldn't clearly identify the type of. He saw no children beside the man, and the moment he noticed him lasted only a few seconds as he turned back from the trash can. He didn't remember which direction the man left in, nor did he hear footsteps or an engine starting. One officer was sent to stand in the exact position of the man smoking from the statement, to test whether from that angle the area where Peter was playing could be seen. When he turned his face in the assumed direction of the man, the result caught the team's attention. From that spot, if someone bent slightly or shifted a little to the left, they could clearly observe the oak trunk and the surrounding area without being blocked by bushes. That meant the man, if present at the right moment, would have had a direct line of sight to Peter without drawing anyone else's attention. Based on the three statements, the investigation team built a 2D scene model using string, marker stakes, and the topographic map. They recreated the path of the woman walking her dog, the route of the boy on the bike, and the maintenance worker's position minute by minute. Colored cards representing adults, children, and suspected positions were placed on the ground, making it clearer to see the empty time frame, the 40 to 60 seconds, when no one was directly observing Peter. That gap was the center of the entire case. Through elimination, the investigation team realized that during that window, even if an adult approached Peter from behind, from the left, or from the parking lot direction, the chance of being noticed was virtually zero. The witnesses' scattered positions, lines of sight obstructed by tree trunks, and the wind carrying sound out toward the lake all contributed to creating perfect conditions for someone to act without leaving clear traces. However, there were still inconsistencies. One officer asked the bike-riding boy again about the direction he saw the bright shadow moving. When the investigation team projected that direction onto the 2D model, they realized the bright spot was right next to the area where the mismatched small child's footprints had been found. That meant the image the boy saw, even if not Peter, could have been movement from another child. This gave more weight to the hypothesis of a second child's presence. The investigators continued pressing the maintenance worker for more details about the man smoking. He tried to recall. He was standing slightly bent over, maybe lighting a cigarette or looking at something in his hand. One officer asked if he saw the man talking to anyone, but the worker confirmed he heard no voices. The most important part was that the timing when he saw the man almost exactly matched the moment the dog-walking woman saw Peter. Those two independent events, when placed side by side, suggested the possibility that the smoking man had been observing the area around Peter beforehand. One more detail was added to the model: the strong wind from the lake. When an officer stood at the Oaks position and shouted "Peter," another standing 20 meters away toward the parking lot heard the sound scattered, like a faint, distant echo. Repeated tests showed that sound from the woods did not easily carry to the lawn area, as the strong wind distorted, stretched, or shredded noises. This rendered reliance on a cry or call from Peter to determine direction ineffective. When all the layers of information were overlaid on the 2D map, the scene picture became clearer. No one actually saw Peter move. No one saw an adult approach him, and the bright flash the bike-riding boy saw might not have been Peter. The only certainties were that the moment Peter vanished coincided with the presence of an adult standing next to a large vehicle near the parking lot and the appearance of another child's footprints, not Peter's deeper in the eastern trail. The investigation team began narrowing their focus. One officer looked at the diagram and said quietly, as if only to himself, "If that man left the parking lot at the right moment, we need to know where he went." While everyone was still checking the marker points, a call came from the Eastern Trail area. Urgent but steady. "Come see this." The officers immediately turned in that direction, because any detail in that zone where the drag mark and the two types of footprints had appeared could be the next piece to help determine what had happened to Peter in those brief minutes. The Maumee Bay parking lot on the morning of September 18, 1971 had only a few dozen vehicles recorded in the gate attendant's logbook. Upon request from the investigation team, the attendant immediately brought the entire registration log to the cordoned-off area, where officers spread out a large board to sort every vehicle that had entered or exited between 7:30 and 9 a.m. In total, 27 vehicles left the park within the time frame overlapping the window 8, the estimated period when Peter disappeared. Each vehicle was numbered, with the entry and exit times, registered owner's name, place of residence, and vehicle type clearly noted. 3 officers reviewed each entry in sequence, cross-referencing them with witness statements and the established 2D diagram. The goal was to identify any vehicle that left the parking lot at the exact critical minute, the moment Emily turned back and could no longer see her brother. Among the vehicles that departed between 8:14 and 8:18 a.m., most were family cars, small sedans, station wagons, and a few pickup trucks belonging to fishermen who had arrived early and then left. However, one entry made the entire team pause. Blue box truck departed 8:15 a.m., driver description unclear. There was nothing outwardly unusual in the description. An older box truck, dark blue, with a slight dent on the rear door. The anomaly lay in the fact that the gate attendant had been unable to accurately record the license plate as the vehicle exited. The plate line read, V3709, uncertain. The question mark prompted the investigation team to immediately ask the attendant to recount the situation. The attendant explained that as the truck left the lot, the driver leaned down slightly, partially shielding his face with the hand holding a cigarette, preventing a clear view. The truck moved quickly and did not stop when the attendant tried to confirm the plate. The only thing he remembered was that the plate didn't look like a typical Ohio plate, because the first character appeared to be a large V, a format he rarely saw on vehicles registered in the state. One officer immediately cross-checked the list of blue trucks registered in Ohio in September 1971. No plates came close to the characters described by the attendant. Further checks against registration lists from Michigan, Indiana, and Pennsylvania yielded no matches. This led to the first conclusion everyone felt in the air. The blue truck was not registered in Ohio. An officer experienced in federal investigations immediately asked, out-of-state plate? Or a federal driver's vehicle? If it's federal, there's no way we can trace it this morning. That remark silenced the investigation team for a few seconds. A truck not registered in the state appearing near the time Peter vanished, and leaving the lot at the critical minute with an incompletely recorded plate. In many child abduction cases involving rapid movement, experienced perpetrators often used interstate or out-of-state plated trucks to avoid quick tracing by local systems. The officers immediately separated the blue truck case from the remaining 26 vehicles and marked it in red on the board. One person was assigned to return to the parking lot to search for any tire tracks, oil stains, or lingering scents. But the strong lake wind had blown most odors away within minutes, and the dry ground around the lot retained no clear tire marks. Another detail began to stand out. The location of the smoking man seen by the park maintenance worker was not far from where the blue truck had been parked. The 2D model was adjusted to include the truck's position on the map. The distance from where the man stood to Peter's oak tree was just enough for direct observation of that area, as previously confirmed when an officer tested the line of sight. If the smoking man was the driver of the blue truck, then he had been standing in a position from which he could watch Peter during the crucial minutes. There was no direct evidence proving it, but the coincidence in location made the suspicion heavier. The officers asked the gate attendant to describe how the truck moved as it left the lot. He said it headed east, merging onto Highway 2A in just a few dozen seconds. The truck did not signal, did not slow down, only accelerated steadily and disappeared from view. That direction led out of Toledo, toward the interstate routes where many long-haul truck drivers traveled. A quick feasibility analysis was conducted. If the truck left the park at 8:15, and if the driver had approached the oak area where Peter stood, it would take only 20-25 seconds to pick up a child, close the cargo door, and drive away. That time frame fit perfectly within the window 8, when no witness was looking directly toward the parking lot. The investigation team began splitting tasks. One group continued reviewing vehicles with unusual or unclear plates, while another started checking records of out-of-state trucks recorded entering or exiting Toledo that morning. But in 1971, there were no surveillance cameras, no automatic plate readers, and federal records were not yet standardized. Finding an unclear plated truck on an interstate route early in the morning was nearly an impossible task. The officer in charge of compiling information marked all the key factors on the board: the exact time the truck left the lot, the driver's line of sight if standing where the maintenance worker saw the man, the coincidence between the direction Peter was facing and the truck's location, the plate not belonging to Ohio, the witness's inability to describe the driver's face, the entire period of Peter's disappearance lasting only 45-60 seconds. Taken together, the blue truck became the first substantial suspect, not only because the departure time matched perfectly, but also because of its inherently difficult traceability. A young officer looked at the list of 27 vehicles and said quietly, loud enough for the group to hear, "If this truck isn't from Ohio, and the driver didn't want to be seen clearly, then we're dealing with someone who knew exactly what he was doing." A quick discussion began right beside the notes board. When the trail team's radio crackled again from the woods, the voice tense. "Investigation team, we need someone to come see this. It might explain the direction of movement." The officers immediately left the parking lot, taking the marked board with them, because any detail emerging from the woods at that moment could directly connect to the blue truck and Peter's disappearance. When the trail team's radio called for support, the command team immediately mobilized additional forces. A large-scale search was activated within minutes, expanding the perimeter not only around the eastern trail but covering the entire Maumee Bay State Park area. The lake wind began blowing harder, carrying the scent of water and chill, making the search effort more difficult. However, this was still the golden window before natural traces could be erased by wind and foot traffic. A sheriff's office helicopter was dispatched from Toledo, landing in the parking lot just 14 minutes after the request. Its rotors kicked up dust and dry leaves, creating a large swirl that enveloped the corner of the lot already marked by the suspicious presence of the blue truck. As the helicopter lifted off again, its observation camera was adjusted to scan every lakeside area, forest trail, low-lying strip, and zone with potential ground-level blind spots. On the ground, 3 K-9 teams were released at Peter's last known position and the suspicious points in the woods. Dogs trained for child searches were equipped with long leads, allowing wider movement while remaining under handler control. They sniffed around the oak trunk, then ran quickly into the eastern trail, the exact direction officers had noted earlier. However, about 15 meters deeper into the woods, the K-9S began losing the scent. Clearly, the lake wind dispersed odors, and the damp soil diluted scent samples too quickly. Still, their direction of travel reinforced one critical line of speculation. Something had moved along this trail at the exact moment Peter vanished. Along the shoreline, the boat search team used surface sonar equipment to scan the entire nearshore water area. Any object larger than 40 centimeters beneath the surface would appear on the screen. Hundreds of meters were swept in a grid pattern, each square marked with chalk on the map. Nothing suspicious, only rocks, rotted wood, and a few clumps of weeds. This virtually eliminated the hypothesis that Peter had fallen into the lake. While ground forces worked continuously, the Lucas County Dispatch Center received a flood of calls from residents within a 20-mile radius of the park. News of a missing 4-year-old boy spread quickly via local radio and word of mouth from morning park visitors. One caller reported seeing a child resembling Peter standing near a gas station on Highway 2A. Another said they saw a child running along a farm fence several miles from the park. There was even a call about a man carrying a small child into a dark-colored truck. All these tips were forwarded to the coordination team and immediately prioritized for follow-up. However, after sending officers to each location, checking every road segment, and interviewing each tipster, the results were the same. False leads. The child at the gas station was the son of a tourist stopping for drinks. The child at the farm was the owner's grandchild. The man carrying a child into the truck turned out to be a father whose upset toddler refused to get in the vehicle. None of the information led to Peter. Despite the disappointment, officers continued logging every call chronologically into the system. They knew that in every child abduction case, false tips always outnumbered accurate ones by dozens to one. But they also knew that a single correct call, one small detail, could change the entire trajectory of the investigation. Inside the woods, the trail team continued building on the initial findings. They marked every area of disturbed soil and every direction the large footprints might have turned. However, what drew their attention most was the unnatural silence of the forest. At this hour, there should have been the natural background of small animal sounds, bird song, or lake waves echoing against the shore. But along the eastern trail, the space had become eerily quiet. The officers contacted the helicopter team to request an aerial sweep northeast, the direction the blue truck might have taken. Helicopter footage revealed a network of small highways, dirt roads leading out of the park, and several unpaved turnoffs. If someone intended to remove Peter from the scene quickly, all these routes could be used in under 2 minutes. One officer standing in the parking lot, eyes fixed on the helicopter feed, whispered as if thinking aloud. If it was a truck, and he wanted to get away fast, He wouldn't need to go far. Just hit 2A, then turn onto the interstate, and he's gone. It wasn't an official statement, but it reflected the shared feeling of the entire investigation team. The possibility that Peter had been taken out of the park in under a minute was very real. When the helicopter search found no unusual movement in the immediate area, the coordination team was forced to expand the search radius another 3 miles eastward. The K-9 teams were redirected back to the trail's center to attempt retracking. Though wind conditions offered little hope, the sonar team continued scanning deeper lake sections, just in case something had sunk in the colder bottom waters. While every unit poured effort into the area, the woods team's radio signaled again. Signs of movement off the main trail. Possibly an adult. Need confirmation. Footsteps immediately rushed in that direction, because any small deviation from the narrow trail could point to an escape route no one had seen in time. No one said it aloud, but the atmosphere from the parking lot to the woods was heavy with the same thought. Every sign pointed toward Peter having been removed very quickly, in a direction no witness saw, by someone who knew exactly how to avoid attention. For weeks after the large-scale search at Maumee Bay, hundreds of reports were added to the file, but no pieces fit together solidly enough to become a specific investigative lead. The presence of the drag mark, small footprints, large footprints, and the blue truck leaving the parking lot at the critical minute all made the case more complicated, but no single element was strong enough to build a unified scenario. The deeper the officers dug into each detail, the more the leads contradicted one another, as if the entire scene had been covered in a thick fog that rendered every effort into empty space. The only 3 witnesses near Peter at the key moment provided fragmented information that could not be connected. The woman walking her dog insisted Peter was standing still, facing the parking lot. The boy on the bike maintained he saw a bright shadow but remembered the shirt color wrong. The maintenance worker saw the smoking man in a position from which he could observe Peter's area, but no one could describe the man's face. The investigation team rebuilt the 2D model from the 3 statements multiple times, yet each reconstruction revealed new ambiguities. Even more serious was the inability to determine Peter's direction of movement. From the oak to the eastern trail would take only a few seconds for a small child to run, but no one saw the boy run that way. From the oak to the parking lot was only a few dozen meters, but no one saw him head in that direction either. Both routes lacked direct witnesses. The fact that the boy vanished almost silently, in an extremely short window, prevented the team from reconstructing the manner of disappearance according to any familiar logic. The K-9 teams, despite maximum effort, could not hold the scent because the lake wind diluted the traces. Each time the dogs picked up a direction to a certain point, a shift in wind or change in terrain caused them to lose the target scent completely. In child search cases, tracking dogs usually provide at least one clear direction of movement to define the next search area. But here, just a few minutes of strong wind erased everything. A veteran Lucas County officer later wrote in the summary report, "It was as if Peter vanished into thin air." That was not a metaphor. With scant data, a narrow time frame, and the scene quickly disturbed by helicopter activity, rescue teams, and curious onlookers, the initial signs were overlaid and lost on the very first day. The smallest details, shoe prints, scents, displaced blades of grass no longer remained intact after a few hours. The appearance of the blue truck gave investigators hope for the clearest lead. But because the plate did not match any registration in Ohio and no witness could clearly see the driver, the team could not determine which state the truck belonged to or whether it was a rental, a company interstate hauler, or something else. The federal data systems in 1971 were still fragmented and inconsistent across states. Tracing a truck with an unclear plate was virtually hopeless. Some officers leaned toward the theory that Peter was removed from the park by truck in an incredibly brief window that no one noticed, but the lack of direct evidence prevented this theory from becoming the official investigative direction. Conversely, another group believed Peter might have wandered away from the oak on his own, but that did not explain why no one saw where he went, why no one heard crying, while the area did not have the dense blind spots of a true deep forest. The small footprints that did not match Peter's size added further chaos to the file. Was there really another child present in that area that morning? Or did those prints belong to someone at a completely different time? No one had an answer. The absence of surveillance cameras, clear plate records, and forensic technology caused the case to quickly reach a point with no solid footing for further expansion. After nearly a year of dissecting every hypothesis, re-interviewing every witness, and reanalyzing every record, the investigating agency was forced to face a painful reality. No viable investigative path existed. Every lead contained a major gap that prevented pursuit. Efforts to coordinate with neighboring state police also yielded no additional valuable data. There were no signs of Peter appearing in hospitals, churches, gas stations, or any place lost children are typically taken. In the final summary report, the lead investigator wrote, "The case lacks the basic elements needed to construct a clear scenario. No direction, no route, no identified suspect, no direct witness. All existing data lacks sufficient weight to prosecute or expand into a federal investigation." In March 1972, the file was officially moved to inactive status, not because the agency wanted to give up, but because there was no new evidence left to pursue. Peter Graham's disappearance became one of the coldest child cases in Lucas County, a case with no body, no direct witness, no definitive physical evidence, and no clear direction of movement. In the years that followed, the file was reopened only a few times when someone called to report seeing a child who looked like Peter. But every call ended the same way as the false leads on the first day. Nothing relevant. The name of the 4-year-old boy gradually faded from newspapers, then from community memory. Only one cold entry remained in the file. Status: unresolved. Case inactive. In the winter of 1981, exactly 10 years after the day Peter vanished, the Ann Arbor Police Department in Michigan received a call from a hiker in a small forest in Pittsfield Township. The man had discovered what appeared to be the shape of a child, covered under a layer of fallen leaves and thin snow. When the rapid response team arrived, they confirmed it was the body of a young boy, estimated to be around 5 to 6 years old. The remains no longer intact due to the cold weather and natural decomposition over time. News of the child being found spread quickly, and just hours later, the Lucas County Sheriff's headquarters in Ohio, the unit that had handled Peter Graham's disappearance, received notification. A young male child, roughly the same age range, found unidentified in Michigan. The geographic proximity and timing immediately drew attention. Although Peter disappeared in 1971 and the body was found in 1981, the child's age in the woods made it impossible for anyone to ignore. Initial calculations suggested that if Peter were still alive, he would be about 14 that year, so the age discrepancy raised many doubts. But missing persons files are always re-examined whenever an unidentified child is found, and Peter Graham's name was mentioned once again in internal meetings. 2 Lucas County investigators were sent to Ann Arbor that same day. The body was placed in the examination room, on a cold steel table. Bone size, tibia, and femur lengths all indicated an age of 5 to 6. It could not be Peter, who disappeared at 4 years old 10 years earlier. This exclusion conclusion came quickly, but what prevented the case from being simply another unidentified child was a different detail, so small it was overlooked in the initial autopsy. In the pocket of the child's jacket, sewn from thick, dark brown fabric with no label, was a very small item, a crumpled piece of paper, only the size of a thumbnail. A forensic technician unfolded it under strong light. The paper was nearly rotted, but a few handwritten letters were still legible thanks to ink that had not completely faded. The shaky, uneven line, seemingly written in haste, Franklin Cole. The name was completely unfamiliar in connection to Peter's disappearance, but it made the Ann Arbor investigator pause. Could this be the child's name, the caregiver's name, or someone entirely different? The piece of paper was placed in an evidence bag, sealed, and sent for analysis. The results revealed nothing more about the ink. No address, no phone number, no other clues. Just those 2 words alone. Although the information was not enough to directly link to Peter's case, the name Franklin Cole was entered into the Interstate File Exchange System. By spring 1981, when Ann Arbor's file was sent to Lucas County for comparison, a veteran officer immediately noticed something suspicious. In the 1971 Maumee Bay disappearance, one part of a witness statement had mentioned a man appearing near the parking lot, but his name had never been identified. Though it could be mere coincidence, the emergence of a clear name tied to the unidentified child piqued the investigators' curiosity. Lucas County reopened the entire Peter Graham file. Maps, crime scene photos, witness statements, investigation team notes, even documents previously considered vague, were all pulled out again. A meeting took place in April 1981, lasting over 4 hours, revolving around the big question: who is Franklin Cole? No one knew. No birth records, no social security number, no one reported missing under that name. When searching resident lists in Toledo and nearby counties from 1970-1972, the name did not appear in any database. But a broader search yielded the first lead. A long-haul truck driver in Michigan who had been questioned by police in a completely unrelated case stated that he had once worked the same transport route with a guy named Cole in the 1970s. The man was unsure of his middle name but remembered that he often introduced himself with combined names, Frank or Franklin. When pressed further, he said he recalled the guy had worked in the Toledo area before switching to the Michigan route. This response, though vague, raised a troubling possibility. Franklin Cole might have been in the Maumee Bay area at the exact time Peter disappeared. The investigation team began tracing every record related to truck drivers with the last name Cole from the 1960s-1980s. But the record-keeping technology of that era was too fragmented. Small transport companies often did not keep complete files, and many people used fake names for interstate work. The more they searched, the fainter the trail became. Franklin Cole could be a real name, an alias, a borrowed name, or just a name hastily written in an emergency by someone connected to that unidentified child. Meanwhile, the young boy's body in Ann Arbor was entered into the Interstate Child John Doe network, but no family claimed it. No missing persons report in the area matched. No child fit the age description at that time. The boy was not Peter, but he carried a piece of paper with the name of a man who might be linked to the area where Peter vanished. In the Ann Arbor file, another detail was recorded. On the boy's right arm was an old bruise, shaped like a strong adult grip mark. No clothing with labels, no papers, no signs of family. Everything suggested the child might have been moved through multiple places before death. No one knew how the child got to Michigan. The route connecting Ohio and Michigan was only about a 3-hour drive. If Franklin Cole was involved with the child in Ann Arbor, and if he had been at Maumee Bay, the connection between the two cases began to stand out. Peter's file was officially marked reactivated in May 1981. 2 investigators were assigned to trace the origin of the name Franklin Cole. They contacted transport companies, major gas stations along Highway 2, trucker diners, even private parking lots where long-haul drivers often overnighted. Many had heard of the name Cole, but no one knew his full name. One said Cole once drove a dark blue truck. Another said his truck might have been faded gray-blue over time. One small but shocking detail, in several different statements about the truck color, all mentioned an older model truck, high chassis, long cargo bed, the type matching the description of the truck that left the park at the exact minute Peter vanished. There was no evidence strong enough to conclude anything, but the pieces together formed a shape. A man named Franklin Cole, possibly an interstate truck driver, once drove a blue or gray-blue truck, appeared in the Toledo area in the early 1970s, and might be connected to at least one child who died in Michigan. That repetition could no longer be seen as random. The Lucas County investigation team realized that Peter Graham's disappearance was not as simple as initially assumed. An unidentified child in Ann Arbor had suddenly revived an entire file frozen for nearly 10 years, and the name of a man never before considered a suspect became the key, turning the whole investigation in a new direction. But that was only the beginning of the series of questions about to unfold. Ever since the name Franklin Cole appeared in the Ann Arbor file, every search effort began revolving around determining whether this person actually existed, and if so, who he was. The leads gathered from long-haul truckers in Michigan gradually formed a hypothesis. Cole was very likely an interstate truck driver who regularly ran the Ohio-Michigan route in the 1970s. This matched eerily with the characteristics of the blue truck that left the park at the exact moment Peter vanished. When the two Lucas County investigators began tracing drivers active in September 1971, they uncovered a faint report in an old database, C. Franklin Cole, Federal Transport, Midwest Route. Federal transportation databases from that era were incomplete, but that small entry was the only starting point. The investigators obtained a warrant to access records stored at the warehouse of a long-bankrupt private transport company. There, they found an incomplete but valuable time log. A truck on Franklin Cole's route had passed through Toledo on September 17, 1971, just one day before Peter disappeared. There was no information showing he stopped at Maumee Bay State Park. But the route he usually took cut across Highway 2, less than 3 miles from the park. That distance was too close to be considered mere coincidence. The investigators marked Cole as a person of interest, someone requiring clarification. Checking his background revealed an even more disturbing truth. In 1968, in Indiana, a man named Franklin J. Cole had been arrested on suspicion of involvement in a case of enticing a child into a truck. He was not convicted due to lack of direct evidence, but the file described him clearly: long-haul truck driver. White male, approximately 5'11", 170 pounds, dark hair, owner of an older dark blue box truck. This was the piece that made the entire investigation team sit up straight. The description matched almost perfectly with the witness at Maumee Bay in 1971. The smoking man standing next to a dark-colored truck. No one had seen his face, but the build and vehicle type aligned. The Lucas County lead investigator immediately requested Cole's last known residence. After weeks of digging, they located an old tax record showing he had lived in the suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, from 1970-1972, then vanished from the administrative system. The house he had rented had long had new owners, and the former landlord had passed away. When asked, neighbors only remembered him as the quiet trucker guy, who was often away for days at a time. Another transport driver who had worked with Cole years earlier said he had a habit of picking up kids at truck stops and taking them for rides. The man admitted he had heard this from rumors among other drivers but had never witnessed it himself. Though secondhand, it darkened Cole's file further. When the investigators tried to locate Cole for questioning, they discovered he had left Ohio long ago. After months of sending requests to multiple states, a small police station in Kansas finally reported that they had encountered a man named Franklin Cole during a vehicle inspection in 1975. No violation, no arrest, but at that time he was driving a faded blue box truck, very similar to the 1971 description. The most critical information came when Lucas County investigators requested verification of the 1968 Indiana arrest record. In the worn paper file, they found a forgotten detail. The victim in the case Cole was suspected of enticing was a 6-year-old boy, and a witness statement from the time described Cole as having tried to pull the boy into the back of the truck and said the boy looked like a child he once knew. That strange remark had once been dismissed as meaningless, but when connected to the Ohio case, it sent chills down the investigators' spines. Lucas County immediately sought to place Cole on the interview list. But finding him in 1981 was far from easy. He had left the Interstate Transport Company in 1974, taking odd jobs, most of them unregistered. Everyone who had contact with him said Cole frequently used aliases or initials to avoid being tracked. His disappearance from all official registration systems made him a ghost. Still, a small breakthrough came in the fall of 1981, when Toledo police received a tip that Cole had appeared at a highway diner. 2 investigators arrived, questioned the owner, but he only remembered the guy sat drinking coffee, fidgety, chain-smoking. When shown the composite sketch, the owner recognized some similarity, but could not confirm it definitively. No cameras, no proof Cole had just been there. If he had been present, he had left minutes before police arrived. The only chance to establish him as a real suspect was an alibi for September 18, 1971. Cole had told the transport company he was at a truck stop in Fremont, nearly 70 miles from Maumee Bay, but cross-checking the company's delivery logs showed the timestamp was off. There was no evidence confirming he was in Fremont. On the contrary, Another driver recalled seeing Cole's blue truck parked in Toledo the night before Peter vanished. The alibi was shaky, but not enough to charge him. No one saw him at Maumee Bay. No one saw him with Peter. No one saw him drive the truck out of the park. The regrettable reality was that in 1981, identification technology, vehicle tracking, and forensic analysis could not produce a major breakthrough. Though the name Franklin Cole had finally emerged as a highly promising suspect, the investigation team had to note insufficient evidence for arrest. A man with a prior child enticement arrest, present in the region, with movement patterns matching the departing truck, rumored to take kids in his truck, yet he could not be arrested, simply due to lack of direct witnesses and physical evidence. Though not detained, the name Franklin Cole was boldly marked at the top of the file, primary person of interest, and from that point on, every investigative direction expanded around him. But it would take many more years before Cole's shadow truly became clear in the entire story. In 1983, when the VICAP Violent Criminal Apprehension Program database began its pilot implementation in several states, many child disappearance cases, with no clear direction of movement, were entered into the system for behavioral pattern analysis. The Peter Graham file, which had been frozen for more than a decade, was entered into VCAP as a test case because local investigators could no longer find any new investigative direction. No one expected VICAP to produce a significant change. But the system's behavioral analysis and crime pattern matching produced a flag that no one anticipated. According to the simulated data, the disappearance pattern of no sound left behind, no witness seeing it, occurring within a time window under 60 seconds, matched the behavioral model of interstate vehicle-based abductions, a type of crime often linked to long-haul truck drivers operating across state lines. VICAP flagged the Peter Graham file as potential interstate abduction possible transport across state borders. This flag immediately changed how the case was viewed, because local forces could not handle cases with potential federal elements alone. The VICAP report was sent back to Lucas County, and the investigators read and reread the behavioral description inferred by the system. Unusually short action time. No noise. The child disappears in the direction of a parked vehicle. The vehicle leaves the scene at the critical moment. No physical evidence found at the location. All four factors aligned perfectly with what happened at Maumee Bay in 1971. Although the system did not name a suspect, every description pointed to Franklin Cole, the man who once drove a dark blue truck, appeared in Toledo the day before the disappearance, and had a prior record involving children. Immediately after the VICAP report was forwarded to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, BCI, the Peter Graham file was upgraded from intrastate missing person to suspected interstate abduction case. This opened new access. Investigators could request data from federal way stations, toll booths, some transport delivery records, and highway patrol reports from 1971-1980. It was not complete data, but still far broader than the original investigative scope. In an internal meeting between BCI and Lucas County, the name Franklin Cole was repeated over and over. The connection between Cole and the unidentified boy's body in Ann Arbor in 1981 added more weight to the suspicion. Cole may have transported multiple children along the Ohio-Michigan route over the years. No one dared assert it definitively, but VICAP's behavioral data made the hypothesis difficult to dismiss. An internal bulletin issued in November 1983 stated clearly, Franklin J. Cole, primary suspect, behavioral match. This was the first time in the entire case that Cole was placed on the official suspect list, and not just as a person of interest as in previous years. Being listed as an official suspect did not mean immediate arrest was possible, but it allowed federal agencies to coordinate tracing Cole's movements over a wider scope. The results not only reinforced the suspicion but also opened many new questions. From federal checkpoint data, 2 investigators discovered a suspicious travel route. A box truck matching Cole's description was recorded passing through the Monroe, Michigan station on September 17, 1971, heading south. Although the license plate did not perfectly match what the park gate attendant recorded, the consecutive appearance of 9 similar characters in the blurry record convinced investigators that this could be the same vehicle, only misrecorded by the attendant. When tracing similar truck appearances from 1969 to 1973, they found something alarming. The vehicle matching Cole's description frequently passed through the Toledo area more often than normal for an interstate driver with a varying route. This suggested Cole may have had personal reasons to return to the area beyond delivery assignments. A demographic review was also conducted to find anyone with the last name Cole in Ohio and Michigan at that time. The results showed only 3 people named Cole living within a 50-mile radius of Toledo in 1971, but none named Franklin. This further strengthened the possibility that Franklin Cole was not his real name, but a name used in the long-haul trucking community, making tracing him much more difficult. Although there was now enough behavioral data to place Cole on the official suspect list, there was still no physical evidence to charge him. No one saw him in the park. No one saw him approach Peter. No one saw him drive the truck away. The piece of paper found in the pocket of the unidentified child in Michigan was only an indirect lead, insufficient legally to prosecute. In a year-end 1983 progress review meeting, the lead investigator admitted, "He might be the one we're looking for. He might not. But every direction leads back to him." But when asked whether there was basis for an arrest warrant, the answer remained, no. Only behavioral inference, indirect statements, and timing coincidences. No physical evidence, no DNA, no hard proof. Nevertheless, a significant change had occurred. From that point on, the name Franklin Cole was placed at the top of the file, no longer at the bottom of the notable witness list. And when the file was transferred to cold case status for the second time, a red-framed note appeared on the first page. If Cole is still alive, he may be the key to unlocking the entire case. But no one could have imagined that nearly 4 more decades would pass before that name resurfaced again, and this time, it would no longer be speculation. In February 1972, less than half a year after the Peter Graham file was temporarily closed, a medical report in Arizona was recorded very briefly but strangely enough that later investigators would pause when reading the final line. At St. Agnes Medical Center in Phoenix, a boy approximately 2 to 3 years old was brought into the emergency room in a state of mild malnutrition, wearing thin clothing with no accompanying paperwork or identification information. The receptionist on duty quickly noted on the intake form, "Boy left by 2 men. No names given. Left immediately." No one knew who the 2 men were. Security cameras did not exist. The receptionist only remembered that they wore hats pulled low over their faces and said nothing beyond placing the child on a chair and leaving the hospital almost immediately. The boy cried weakly for a few minutes, then fell silent when carried into the examination room. In the paper record, the pediatrician noted the initial description, male, approximately 2 to 3 years old, light brown blonde hair, light brown eyes, physical condition consistent with age, but showing signs of prolonged malnutrition for about a month. Teardrop-shaped birthmark behind the right shoulder. It was this birthmark that made the 1972 file a critical detail nearly half a century later. The Graham family had described Peter as having a faint birthmark behind his right shoulder, about the size of a forefinger tip. The description in the Phoenix record matched almost exactly. But in 1972, there was no technology for cross-state data comparison, and although Arizona sent the report to nearby child welfare agencies, no one knew that Ohio had a missing child with similar characteristics. Upon closer examination, the doctor noted that the boy could barely speak in complete sentences. He only uttered a few simple words and spoke slowly, leading the doctor to wonder whether he had a language development delay or if it was simply the result of an unstable living environment. The clothes he wore were cheap: a faded t-shirt with no label, oversized pants, and children's shoes worn nearly through the soles. No personal belongings accompanied him. When asked his name, the child only shook his head or did not respond. The doctor had to fill in the name field on the record. Unknown temporary designation, Daniel Harper. Daniel was the name suggested by the social worker. Harper, an estimated surname based on the name of the neighborhood near the hospital. No one knew that temporary name would last more than 50 years. Temporary caregivers recorded that Daniel had panic reactions when hearing loud noises behind him, especially when a man approached. He would cling tightly to the nurse's shirt and cry intensely whenever he saw the shadow of someone wearing a dark jacket or hooded coat. These specific reactions led the doctor to suspect he had experienced a period of abandonment or prolonged unsafe environment. Since no one claimed him, Daniel was transferred to Arizona's temporary care system. Records noted that he was very quiet in the first months, rarely initiating communication, and often startled by the sound of large trucks passing by. A social worker wrote in the log on May 12, 1972, Daniel covers his ears and hides under the table when hearing a loud truck engine outside. No one could explain that reaction. They only knew the boy had a particular fear of loud engine sounds. In the first 3 months, the hospital and Arizona welfare agencies tried to locate Daniel's relatives. They sent notices to western and southwestern states, contacted churches, schools, and welfare centers, but no one reported a missing child matching the description. No leads, no parents. No one inquired about him. No one realized that same year, in a state more than 1,700 miles to the east, a 4-year-old named Peter Graham had vanished from an Ohio park without a trace. No one knew about the strange coincidence in the birthmark, age, hair color, and series of psychological reactions identical to those of a child torn from a safe environment. Daniel was placed in the foster care system and lived with a temporary foster family in North Phoenix. This family recorded that he learned very quickly, liked lining up toys in rows, and was almost silent when having to interact with strangers. Daniel also often talked in his sleep and mentioned the big tree or strong wind phrases no one understood. Occasionally, he would scream in the middle of the night because he saw a big blue truck. Those fragmented words were not seen as clues. No one thought they could be linked to events that occurred in Ohio a year earlier. Arizona tried to find prior medical records for Daniel to see where he had lived before, but no system had matching data. No vaccination records. No birth certificate. No hospital data. A child as if he had appeared out of thin air. When Daniel was officially adopted at the end of 1972, part of the old file was archived deep in the system and the rest scattered across various agencies. Unfortunately, some pages were lost, including the only witness statement description from the hospital receptionist. She had said the 2 men who left the child were both wearing dark jackets, their faces partially obscured, and left the building via a dark-colored box truck parked right in front of the entrance. Dark-colored box truck. If that data had been forwarded to Lucas County that year, the similarity to the blue truck that left the park at the exact moment Peter vanished would have reopened the case decades earlier. But no one connected Arizona to Ohio. No one knew that the note left by 2 men might contain a much larger truth. Perhaps more than one person was involved in the disappearance. Daniel grew up normally, carrying the name Harper, went to school, and lived a life never knowing he had once been the unnamed baby left at a hospital in the middle of the night. No one in his adoptive family suspected that his past might be linked to one of the most mysterious disappearances from the Midwest. 4 decades passed, and Daniel's file was just a faint record in Arizona's welfare system. But that quiet existence was the key piece, a child appearing from nowhere at a time too close to Peter's disappearance, bearing signs that could not be random. And when DNA technology emerged, the name Daniel Harper finally returned to where it belonged. But by then, the 1972 Arizona files had become the door opening to an entirely different chapter of the investigation. In 1999, on the outskirts of Gallup, New Mexico, a small transport company was clearing an old container storage lot to prepare for a new parking area. Among the containers abandoned since the 1980s was a rusted metal one that workers had to pry open with a crowbar. Inside were only miscellaneous crates, rotted wood, torn tarps, and a small cardboard box softened by water. A worker was about to discard it when he noticed it was still fairly heavy, as if something was inside. When the box was opened, Polaroid photos spilled onto the concrete floor. Most were faded, warped, and water damaged to the point of being nearly unrecognizable. But near the bottom of the box, one photo remained relatively intact. The Polaroid showed a boy around 5 to 6 years old, standing in a wide expanse of sand. The boy wore an old t-shirt, his face slightly turned to the left, his gaze drawn to something outside the frame. The sand behind him was dotted with small rocks, the ground cracked and dry characteristics, very typical of the desert in the Four Corners region. The photo immediately drew attention when one of the workers noticed the boy's face bore an eerie resemblance to missing child photos of Peter Graham he had seen on television years earlier. The similarity was not absolute, but the Polaroid evoked something familiar. Light-colored hair, slender build, wary eyes looking off to one side. The worker immediately reported it to the Gallup police. When police arrived, they sealed the container and seized all the Polaroids for analysis. Most were destroyed, with only 2 usable. One was the photo of the boy standing on the sandy ground. The other was just a partial image of an old box truck. Dark-colored cargo area. Paint faded. License plate not visible, but the paint streaks and the style of the cargo arch made 2 experienced investigators frown. That truck body style had been very common among Midwest-Southwest route drivers in the 1970s and 1980s. The photos were sent to the analysis unit in Albuquerque. Technicians used manual background identification methods, comparing sand color, light reflection, distances between geological layers, and the horizon line. What caught their attention most was the low ridge in the distance. Its curve matched the terrain south of Gallup, near Highway 602, the route connecting to the interstate transport corridor that had been heavily used when Cole was still driving. One crime scene expert described it. This isn't a random sand lot. This is the transition area from the Sangre de Cristo Desert into the Navajo Rock region. This photo is almost certainly Gallup. When that information was relayed to Lucas County, where Peter's file remained, despite being a cold case, a young investigator immediately flipped through old documents mentioning Franklin Cole's routes. According to the faded route log provided by the transport company, Cole had run the Columbus, Toledo, Amarillo, Gallup Flagstaff line from 1970-1974. Gallup was a familiar transfer stop for long-haul truckers. A Polaroid of a boy there just a few hundred meters from Cole's old route made everything suspicious. In the lab, technicians enlarged the photo multiple times. The boy's face became clearer. Estimated age, 5 to 6 years old. Light brown blonde hair, slightly long, with the soft curls common in young children. A faint mark on the left cheek that could not be determined as dirt or a birthmark. The boy's eyes looked toward something outside the frame. Not the lens consistent with the reaction of a child placed in front of a stranger or being called by someone standing behind the photographer. A forensic pathologist joined the analysis for age progression comparison, matching it against photos of Peter at 4 years old. Without today's AI technology, they could only sketch by hand. After 2 days, they concluded 40-50% chance the photo is of a different child, but also 40% chance the boy is blood-related to Peter, the remaining 10-20% inconclusive. In other words, it could not be ruled out that it was Peter. Information about the Polaroid was entered into the federal system. An FBI investigator in Albuquerque immediately recognized a key detail. The container holding the photo was the type commonly rented by private transport companies in the 1980s. When they searched old records, they found 3 companies had rented that lot of containers. One of them named Southwest Freight Lines. Southwest Freight Lines was the company that had hired seasonal assistant drivers from 1973-1976. When the driver list from that period was dug up, the name C. Franklin Cole appeared again in a faint outline on a page nearly falling apart. Not only had he driven through Gallup, Cole had worked directly on the route tied to the container holding the Polaroid. Contacting the company for more information was impossible. Southwest Freight Lines had gone bankrupt in 1989. Records sealed and scattered, but investigators located one very important lead. A former manager of the company was still alive. When asked about Cole, the manager admitted he did not clearly remember the face but recalled a driver who liked picking up stray kids at truck stops and giving them candy. "That guy creeped people out," he said. "I once warned him not to bring small children into the truck." There was no proof Cole had ever taken a child far, but the appearance of an unidentified boy in a Polaroid in the Gallup area, right on Cole's route, made the suspicion heavier. As technicians continued examining the photo edges, they found a detail no one had noticed before. The right edge of the Polaroid had a very thin scratch, like a child's fingernail dragged across the surface while it was still wet. This did not help identify the child, but it suggested the Polaroid may have been touched by the boy while being taken. A psychological analyst commented, "Children often react by raising a hand to cover their face or reaching out if asked to stand still by a stranger. This is mild defensive behavior." In the moment investigators connected those details, a major question emerged. If Daniel Harper, the child left in Arizona in 1972, was actually Peter, had Cole taken him through New Mexico before or after that point? If this hypothesis was correct, Peter appearing in Gallup would explain the Polaroid. But it conflicted with the age in the photo. Daniel appeared in 1972 at around 2 to 3 years old. In the Polaroid, the boy looked slightly older, around 5 to 6, fitting the period after 1974 or 1975. A far more disturbing alternative hypothesis emerged. The boy in the photo was not Peter, but another child, a different victim of Cole. If that was true, Cole may have transported multiple young children across states, and Peter was just one of them. Information from the Polaroid was entered into the National Unidentified Missing Children System. No records matched. No one reported a missing child resembling the one in the photo. No family came forward to identify him. And that very silence, a child no one searched for, no one claimed, made investigators realize the Gallup Polaroid was not just a photograph. It was the first signal that Cole may have operated as an interstate child predator. And Peter Graham's disappearance was only one link in his long, dark journey. The Polaroid from the New Mexico desert became the piece that shifted the entire file to a completely new level of severity. Cole was no longer just a suspect in one abduction. He began to take the shape of a cross-state traveler, hiding behind countless transport routes, leaving traces too faint for anyone to recognize for decades. The most important question remained unanswered. Who was the child in the Gallup Polaroid? And why did he appear exactly where Cole had once passed through? In 2017, as family DNA testing kits like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA began gaining widespread popularity in the United States, millions of people submitted saliva samples to check health risks and trace their genealogy. This DNA fever spread rapidly across the country and inadvertently opened a new door for thousands of cold cases, including the name Daniel Harper, now over 40 years old, living a quiet life in Arizona without ever knowing he had once been found in a hospital as an unnamed child. Daniel had never thought his adoption circumstances were unusual. The Arizona state foster records, partially lost over time, only noted that he was found with no relatives coming to claim him. Throughout his adult years, questions about his origins lingered, but were never clear enough for him to pursue. It was not until his wife bought him a DNA kit as a birthday gift that Daniel decided to try it, just to check for hereditary health risks. He could never have imagined that the computer screen a few weeks later would display a message that would change his entire life and awaken a file buried for nearly half a century. Possible biological relatives detected confidence high. The system suggested a list of people labeled possible second or third-degree relatives. One name stood out: Margaret Graham, residing in Ohio, the sister of Peter Graham's mother. The DNA match between Daniel and Margaret, 48.9%. That level of similarity was not for distant relatives. It fit uncle, nephew, aunt-nephew, or closer blood relationships. Daniel stared for a long time, flipping back and forth through the analysis on the screen. He had never heard the name Graham in his life. He had never thought he had relatives in Ohio, but the 48.9% figure was not something that could be mistaken. It was too high to be coincidence, too specific to ignore. When Daniel emailed 23andMe support thinking it was an error, he only received the reply, "Results have been double-checked, no technical error." About 3 days later, Daniel received an email from Margaret Graham herself, who had enabled the setting, allowing DNA relatives to contact her. The message was just one line: "My family lost a child in 1971. Do you know anything about your origins?" It took Daniel many hours to dare reply. He sent childhood photos, the few remaining from his foster family. Margaret sent back photos of Peter Graham, the 4-year-old who vanished nearly half a century earlier. The hair, the bridge of the nose, the curve of the eyelids all evoked a heartbreaking and uncomfortably familiar feeling. It took only another 24 hours for the Lucas County Sheriff's Office to receive official information from 2, 3, and me that an individual residing in Arizona had DNA matching the Graham family. For the first time since 1971, a new line was typed into the Peter file. Possible biological match detected through third-party DNA test. The file was immediately transferred to the IGG Investigative Genetic Genealogy Unit, the team specializing in building family trees for unsolved cases. Their work began by uploading Daniel's DNA data to GEDmatch and family tree DNA to find extended matches. From distant to close connections, the IGG team started constructing the related family branches. The initial family tree was just a tangled map. Dozens of distant Graham relatives, most in the Midwest, a few who had moved to Florida or Texas. But after just a few weeks of linking, the core shape of the tree began to emerge. Daniel shared completely identical gene segments with the lineage of Donna Graham, Peter's mother. Another portion of the DNA matched the paternal Graham side. The IGG team immediately reached an interim conclusion. Daniel Harper has a direct blood relationship with Peter Graham's parents. This could only happen if Daniel was Peter himself, or a full sibling with the same parents, or the child of a very close relative in the Graham line. But the 1972 medical records showed Daniel was around 2 to 3 years old when left in Phoenix. That completely contradicted Peter's actual age in 1972, 5 years old. A 2-year discrepancy could not be explained solely by a doctor's estimation error. The possibility that Daniel was Peter's sibling separated from the family? No record showed Peter's parents ever had another child. Another hypothesis was placed on the table by IGG. Daniel was not Peter, but Daniel had shared part of the journey with Peter before being left in Arizona. This aligned with earlier suspicions that Franklin Cole might not have taken only one child. As IGG delved deeper, they discovered Daniel's DNA also showed signs of generational dilution, a pattern typical in records of children separated from parents very young, lacking genetic data from intermediate generations. Based on comparison algorithms, the 48.9% match indicated Daniel was the nephew of Donna Graham, meaning Peter, if still alive, would be the full brother of Daniel. But that did not align with the age data. The question arose, was there any other child sharing Peter's bloodline taken from Ohio in 1971 besides Peter himself? Graham family documents recorded no births besides Peter. But DNA testing does not lie. IGG realized a pivotal point. Daniel's DNA matched both the paternal and maternal sides of Peter, because Daniel was the child of someone in the Graham line, but not Peter's generation. This sent every hypothesis in a different direction. Daniel was not a child abducted with Peter. Daniel was Peter, but the hospital's age estimate in 1972 had been wrong enough to skew the entire record. Age misestimation by doctors in malnourished children had occurred before. Visual bone size assessment at that time was imprecise, especially in children neglected for extended periods. A 2-year discrepancy was not impossible. When IGG put the two pieces together, nearly 50% DNA and the teardrop birthmark behind Daniel's right shoulder, the conclusion became clearer than any prior analysis. Daniel Harper was Peter Graham. An internal IGG report stated, "No reasonable doubt remains. DNA results have resolved 50 years of discrepancy in the record. The child left in Phoenix in 1972 was none other than missing victim Peter Graham." Lucas County immediately reactivated the entire file. All reports from the blue truck, to the mixed child and adult footprints, to the Gallup Polaroid were brought back to the investigation table. At this point, the search for Franklin Cole was no longer simply about finding a mysterious man linked to one abduction. That name became the center of a chain of events spanning nearly half a century, a journey that took Peter from Ohio to Arizona, then vanished completely from all identification systems. And with DNA confirming Peter's identity, the case now entered an unprecedented phase. Determining where Cole had taken Peter and whether any other children had fallen into his hands. When the DNA report was confirmed, and IGG officially concluded that Daniel Harper was Peter Graham. The entire federal state-county investigation team immediately entered the rebuild from the foundation phase. What they had believed for half a century, that Peter had vanished from Ohio with no one knowing where he went, was no longer true. Peter had not disappeared completely. He had appeared in Arizona just a few months after the abduction, then lived his entire life under a different name, in a different family, knowing nothing about his own origins. But if Daniel equals Peter, a bigger question began to take shape. Who had taken him to Arizona? And why abandon him at a hospital without harm, while other children suspected of being connected to Cole were not so fortunate? To answer that, IGG continued expanding the family tree. The initial tree building was only to confirm the link between Daniel and the Graham family. But as the analysis team dug into peripheral branches' third and fourth-degree relatives, an unexpected connection emerged, leading to an entirely new hypothesis. In the list of 38 distant Graham relatives that appeared after DNA comparison, one name was underlined by the system: Howard Howie Jennings, a fourth-degree relative on Peter's maternal side. Jennings had lived in the Toledo, Ohio area in the late 1960s and early 1970s. What shocked the team was that when IGG checked Jennings' 1970 residency data, they discovered he had rented an apartment right next to Franklin Cole, separated only by a thin wall. The chance that a distant relative of the victim had lived next to the prime suspect was too low a probability to be random. The IGG genealogist called that discovery the network turning point, because it could be the invisible link that once connected Cole to the Graham family without anyone realizing. Jennings had died in 1994, making direct interviews impossible. But when the FBI tracked down his daughter living in Cleveland, she provided information never recorded in any file. Her father had once mentioned the truck-driving neighbor, kind of weird, always asking about kids. Jennings had even warned her, then 8 years old, to stay away from that Cole guy in apartment 3B. The faded memories matched every description of Cole in the criminal file. When asked if her father had ever known the Graham family, she was surprised. "My dad went to Maumee Bay a lot. He liked fishing there. I remember it clearly because he often invited me to go early in the morning." The time frame Jennings frequented Maumee Bay? Around 1969 to 1972. Exactly the same period Peter disappeared. The question immediately erupted in the investigation meeting. Did Cole know Peter, or observe the Graham family through Jennings? To avoid unfounded assumptions, the IGG team continued pulling tax returns, rental records, and utility bills for Cole and Jennings from 1968-1972. A stack of yellowed papers was found in Lucas County Archives, a 1970 plumbing repair request for the apartment building signed by J. Franklin Cole, and right below it, an electrical repair request signed by Howard Jennings. The two lived in adjoining units. IGG reviewed Cole's psychological profile from the 1968 Indiana case when he was suspected of child abduction but escaped charges due to lack of evidence. The file noted, he liked befriending families with young children, often using the excuse of free babysitting. If Cole had contact with Peter's maternal relative, the possibility that he knew photos, knew the Grahams had a 4-year-old boy, or even knew they picnicked at Maumee Bay on weekends was no longer far-fetched. Everything fit in a chilling way. While IGG connected the information, the FBI dug deeper into Jennings. Investigators discovered Jennings had worked at a small auto repair shop in Toledo near the route where Cole often parked his truck. The two had numerous overlapping daily points: diners, fuel stations, repair shops, the apartment building. The thread connecting them was no longer vague. It was a tangled web. A closer examination of Jennings' personal journal, found by his daughter in an old box, revealed a strange entry. The date faded but clearly from the early 1970s. Cole asked about the Graham kid again. "Don't know what the guy is up to." This was the first time a piece of paper, not speculation, not rumor, showed Cole had mentioned the Grahams. The journal did not say whether Jennings warned the Graham family, nor did it mention Cole again afterward. But those words made investigators pause for a long time. If Cole had known about Peter, he may have planned the approach before the abduction day. This explained why he appeared at the exact moment, exact location, exact place. Peter was out of sight for 45 seconds. An FBI behavioral analyst said in the meeting, Cole did not act impulsively. He stalked the target beforehand. Everything at Maumee Bay happened too quickly to be spontaneous. As the family tree continued expanding, IGG found another suspicious detail. Jennings' third-degree cousin living in Toledo in 1971 had been a close high school friend of Peter's mother. This raised an extremely disturbing possibility. Cole may have heard about the Graham family through two layers of connection in Jennings' social network. The investigation team wrote in the report, "It is no longer possible to view Cole as a random suspect." When Daniel, now knowing he was Peter, was briefed by the FBI on the link between Jennings and Cole, he was stunned. Every question that had haunted him throughout his life, who am I? Where did I come from? Finally connected to a larger truth. His disappearance was not an accident, not chance. It was the result of a chain of contacts, observations, and preparations that Franklin Cole had carried out beforehand. The family tree did not just identify Peter, it also exposed a network of relationships that no one had discovered in 52 years, a corridor linking the Graham family to Cole, enough to explain motive, opportunity, and his ability to approach the child. When IGG's final report was submitted at the end of 2023, the conclusion read, "The family tree did not just identify Peter. It proves Cole had indirect social ties to the victim before the disappearance. This is the turning point, opening a federal-level investigation. After 52 years of silence, distant genealogical branches had spoken what no one expected. Peter was not chosen randomly. Cole had been closer to the Graham family than anyone ever imagined. And with that link, the final hunt, the hunt for Cole himself, officially began. The news of the family tree linking Cole to the Graham family prompted the FBI to obtain warrants to search all remaining properties once owned by Franklin Cole. Although Cole had vanished from the system since the 1980s, an old wooden house of his on the outskirts of Barstow, California, still stood like a forgotten gray concrete block in the Mojave Desert. Cole had bought the house in 1977, and it was seized after he disappeared from registered tax addresses in 1981. For nearly 4 decades, no one believed the place held any value until the Peter Graham file was reactivated at the federal level. The federal investigation team and San Bernardino County Sheriff's deputies entered the house early in the morning. Inside was desolate, with the smell of desert dust, engine oil, and dead rodents blending together. But what drew the most attention was not the ruined living room, but the garage where Cole once parked the box truck he drove on the southwest routes. The garage was empty. No truck, no tools. But when technicians scanned the floor with UV lights, they noticed several floor tiles sounded hollow when tapped. These were the common concrete tiles used in the 1960s, 1970s. But a hollow sound often indicated a void beneath. They pried up the tiles with a crowbar. A section of floor lifted, revealing hard, dry soil underneath. Digging less than 40 centimeters down, the shovel blade struck something hard but small. Flashlight beams revealed the edge of a dull wooden box. Its iron lock rusted. The box was brought to the surface. It took the technician a few minutes to break the lock. When the lid flipped open, the entire garage fell silent. Inside were small, old items, wrapped in coarse cloth. A red plastic toy car with a broken wheel, a blue and white striped t-shirt, 2 crumpled map fragments, a black leather-bound notebook. An investigator sat down, took a deep breath, and lifted each item out. The toy car, broken, but unmistakable. The common plastic model from the early 1970s, the same type the Graham family described Peter holding on the morning he vanished. Next was the striped t-shirt. The fabric was rotted, colors almost completely faded, but faint blue stripes remained, matching the description of Peter's blue and white striped t-shirt at Maumee Bay. The technician was so stunned, he had to pause for a few seconds before placing it in an evidence bag. Then the map fragments. One sheet circled in red ink around the Toledo, Ohio area. The other marked a long route straight from Ohio to Phoenix, Arizona. Between those 2 points was a small circle at the Gallup, New Mexico area where the forgotten container with the Polaroid had been found. 3 points: Toledo, Gallup, Phoenix. 3 markers of the journey, taking Peter from Ohio to Arizona. But that was not the most terrifying part. The last item in the box was the journal. The leather cover, dry and stiff, the cloth tie rotted. When the technician opened the first page, the smell of old paper rose, heavy and stifling. In the bottom right corner was slanted, sharp handwriting in black ink, signed, F. Cole. The journal began with scattered entries about driving days, truck stops, and untrustworthy people Cole met on the road. But by page 5, his tone changed. The words became disturbing, distorted, as if his mind was slipping from its normal track. Cole wrote about the boy. No name, no detailed description, just those 2 words. The boy. The entry dated September 17, 1971 made investigators freeze. Saw him again today at the big tree, the boy with the striped shirt. He runs fast but not too fast. The sister looks away a lot. Morning light hits from the left. Good day. Morning light hitting from the left, matching the sun direction at Maumee Bay on the day Peter vanished. The sister looks away a lot. Emily had said she turned away from Peter for about 45 seconds. But the next section was the knife straight into the half-century open file. 9:46 the girl checked the bag. 9:47 she looked away. 9 hours 47 minutes and 30 seconds the boy moved toward the lot. 9:48 grabbed him. No scream. Quick. This timeline matched perfectly with the Window 8 Lucas County built in 1971. The -4 to +4 minute bracket around the moment Emily turned away. The 9 hours 47 minutes and 30 seconds was the estimated second Peter vanished from sight. The match was so horrifying that one investigator blurted, "This can't be coincidence. This is the exact abduction timeline." Cole continued. Truck was ready. Second man waited near the bend. No one saw. Child light? No sound. Second man. The words silenced the room. From 1971 until now, every investigation had assumed Cole acted alone. But the Gallup Polaroid, the unidentified child in Michigan, and now this line all pointed to one thing. Cole did not act alone. The next page described the trip. Left the park fast. No chase. Drove south. Boy quiet. Looks afraid of engines. Gave him toy car. Stopped near Gallup. Took picture. Not only confirming Cole took the Polaroid, he noted the exact location. Gallup. Then the final line of the journey notes. Arizona hospital safe. They won't know. Leave him there. Start over. Arizona Hospital. Leave him there. Start over. That was the confession of taking Peter Daniel to Street Agnes Medical Center in Phoenix, where he was recorded as the unnamed boy left by 2 men. The journal had 3 more pages. Investigators read each line slowly, as if peeling back a crime buried for decades. He is better off without them. They didn't watch him. I did. He was mine to protect from the world. The handwriting sloped and shaky, revealing a distorted mind justifying the abduction. A psychologist who reviewed it concluded, "This is the thinking pattern of a child-obsessed offender who sees himself as a savior." The lead investigator had to pause reading for a few minutes before turning to the final page. "If anyone finds this, the boy will be grown. He won't remember. They lost him. I didn't." The room fell silent. The journal did not just record the abduction, it reconstructed the entire scene, minute by minute, movement by movement, decision by decision, that the justice system could not see for 52 years. The toy. The striped shirt. The maps with 3 matching route points for Peter's journey. The Gallup Polaroid. And the journal describing the abduction in chilling detail. All of it lay in the wooden box, buried under Cole's garage floor. There was no doubt left. The child in the Polaroid. The child in Arizona. The child missing from Maumee Bay. All the same person, Peter Graham. And what lay in the wooden box proved. Cole was not just a suspect. He was the abductor. He was the one who took Peter across 3 states. He was the man who lived secretly next to the victim's relative before striking. The box under the garage floor, silent for half a century, had finally spoken the truth. The existence of the wooden box buried under Cole's garage floor not only shattered every doubt over half a century, but also placed the investigation team before a new task. accurately reconstructing the route Cole took Peter across the United States. His journal recorded fragmented details, left the park fast, stopped before Gallup, Arizona hospital, but to charge at the federal level, investigators needed independent, objective evidence, and most importantly, they had to trace the actual trail of the truck Cole used. The first key came from inside the wooden box itself, a faint, nearly rotted receipt fragment, with only a few letters legible under magnification. Plate AZ4T92M, Service Station, Lima, O. A partial license plate, but enough for the FBI to begin searching archived receipts from old Midwest gas stations, where thousands of damp, torn, and dust-covered pages were still preserved as relics of an era. After 3 weeks of flipping through files, a young analyst found the first piece, a receipt dated September 18, 1971, the exact day Peter vanished at Red Hawk Fuel in Lima, Ohio, clearly recording 28 gallons of fuel sold to a freightliner with plate AZ4T92M. At 12:06 p.m., the location was about 90 miles from Maumee Bay, matching the journal's description, left the park fast. Within hours of taking Peter, Cole had left Ohio heading southwest, avoiding all patrol routes near the park. Cross-referencing with historical US 30 transport route data, the team traced the direction into Indiana. And as predicted, at an old gas station in Fort Wayne, records from September 19, 1971, noted an almost perfect plate match, 4T92M, at 8:34 a.m. Station employee note, truck blue, faded, exactly matching the color of the truck witnesses mentioned just before Peter disappeared. The route began to emerge clearly like a red thread running through the Midwest. The surprise came in Indiana, where investigators found something no one expected. A shipping receipt stuck between 2 postal files in Terre Haute, dated September 20, 1971. Shipper, Cole Freight. Origin, Terre Haute. Destination, Gallup, New Mexico. This was the same location where the 1999 Polaroid was analyzed as being taken, and also the place Cole's journal mentioned, stopped before Gallup. No one knew what was inside the shipment. But now the pieces began fitting into a continuous line. Toledo, Lima, Fort Wayne, Terre Haute, Gallup. And as the journal described, at the McKinley County checkpoint, the only toll station recording trucks on September 21, 1971 along the highway near Gallup, there was a faint but legible entry, blue truck, faded cargo box plate, 4T92M, Arizona. This piece of evidence made the investigation team stand up. The location matched where the Polaroid of the boy was found. The route matched Cole's recorded journey. The plate matched the Lima and Fort Wayne receipts. Everything aligned like the criminal's footprints reprinted on paper. As the FBI pushed the route westward, they shifted to searching service receipts in Phoenix, the final point in the journal. At a small repair shop on Van Buren Street, they found a receipt dated September 22, 1971, clearly stating, Frank C. Truck 4, T92M, replace rear tire. This timing was just one night before the Phoenix hospital recorded Daniel Harper, Peter himself, being left by 2 men. This was the final independent evidence confirming Cole had indeed reached Phoenix in the exact time frame the journal stated. At this point, the FBI assembled all the data on a massive wall map. Each receipt, each slip, each toll record was a red dot. The line connecting those points formed a cross-state journey over 1,800 miles in 4 days: Ohio, Indiana, New Mexico, Arizona. That journey was no longer speculation. It had receipts. It had specific times. It had a real license plate. It had locations matching the journal. And it had evidence coinciding with the Gallup Polaroid and the Phoenix hospital record. The FBI concluded that Cole used the same pattern later described in federal criminal behavior profiles. Abduct in a state with low control density, leave the scene in under 60 minutes, immediately cross into another state to break the entire local pursuit chain, then take the victim to interstate highway regions where no one knew who he was, no one reported him missing, and the interstate data systems in 1971 were virtually unable to communicate. In the journal, Cole wrote, "Interstate is safe. They don't talk to each other." A chilling statement, enough to explain why the Peter Graham case had been stuck in limbo between agencies for 52 years. Those fuel, toll, shipping, and repair receipts papers once thought worthless, now became the strongest evidence to reconstruct Cole's federal abduction route. On the meeting room map, the red line stretched from Lake Maumee to Phoenix like a cut across half of America. The lead investigator stared at that map for a long time and said quietly, "Peter never truly vanished. The boy was taken along this exact route, and now we have found the path he used to take him away." In that moment, Franklin Cole's criminal route was no longer a shadow in the journal. It became a continuous, tangible chain of evidence proving that the abduction of Peter Graham was a calculated, prepared, and executed journey across 4 states, in 4 days, by someone who knew exactly how to exploit the gaps in the federal justice system of that era. The final entries in the journal from the wooden box found under the Barstow garage floor forced the entire federal investigation team to pause and catch their breath, not just because of the clear confession to Peter's abduction, but because of an even more chilling detail. Several pages of the journal used ink and paper types that did not exist in the 1990s. When the forensics lab analyzed the paper age and chemical composition of the ink, the results sparked an explosion of doubt. At least 3 pages in the notebook were written after 1995. This created a terrifying paradox. Official records stated that Franklin Cole died in 1994, but the journal proved he was still alive after that point. No longer speculation or vague inference, the distorted handwriting, ink bleed patterns, and characteristic late 1990s paper were undeniable physical evidence. If Cole had not died, then who was the person buried in his grave? And why had the entire system accepted a death that never happened? The FBI began by reopening Cole's entire death file. Records stated he died in a compressor explosion at a small machine shop in Toledo, with the body identified based on papers found in the victim's pants pocket. But the anomaly appeared immediately in the signature line on the death certificate. The signer was S.R. Cole, a name that did not appear in the Lucas County Coroner's Office personnel list for 1994. This instantly raised suspicion for the team. Someone with the last name Cole signing the death confirmation for another person named Cole? Too coincidental to believe. When the FBI requested old signature data from Toledo PD personnel, the comparison results silenced the entire briefing room. The signature on the death certificate matched almost perfectly with that of Officer Samuel R. Cole, who worked in the Toledo PD Records Department from 1988 to 2003. Samuel Cole, a distant relative of Franklin Cole. When Samuel's personnel file was opened, many dark areas emerged. He had been internally disciplined in 1992 for unauthorized access to the missing persons database, but the incident was erased from his record just a year later. No clear reason. No one knew who intervened. Even more disturbing, Samuel had worked in the Toledo PD Missing Persons Unit in 1971, the year Peter vanished. The deeper the team dug, the more details seemed deliberately concealed. Cole's death file was one of 3 lost in 1997 after a storage facility leak. 3 files lost at the same time, same year, all involving deaths without an attending medical examiner. When the FBI obtained a warrant to search Samuel Cole's former home, a small gray house on the west outskirts of Toledo, they found a hastily boarded-up wooden wall in the basement. Breaking through the panels revealed a nylon-wrapped wooden crate. Inside were not personal items, but Toledo PD records documents, photocopies of the death certificate, scene confirmation reports, and handwritten notes in Samuel's handwriting. Among them, one page made investigators' blood run cold. A short, hurried note. Frank couldn't let the feds track him down. He asked me to help him disappear. Just one paper, no harm to anyone. Below it, the final line. He's still fine. No one suspects. Next to the notebook, the FBI found a yellowed photo. Samuel and Franklin standing side by side, smiling, leaning against an old box truck. Taken in the summer of 1969. Clothes, familiar, completely contrary to any public record. Not just acquaintances. They were friends, possibly more. When the FBI interviewed relatives, a different picture of Samuel Cole emerged. A niece recalled, "Sam always said Frank was smart, good at getting by, just misunderstood. He didn't believe Frank ever did anything bad." A great aunt exclaimed, "Sam always protected Frank, even as kids. When they grew up, they were even closer." Even without the team saying anything, those accounts confirmed everything. Samuel was not an outsider. He was Franklin Cole's protector, helping him hide from the justice system, even helping him stage his own death. The next question. So who died in the 1994 explosion? When the FBI exhumed the grave marked Franklin Cole, DNA analysis confirmed the body inside had no blood relation to the Cole family. The man buried there was a homeless worker killed in a compressor accident. Exactly as the record stated, except for the crucial part, the identification papers found in the victim's pocket were Franklin Cole's, but not carried by the victim. They had been planted by someone. The planter most likely, Samuel. When the FBI pulled Samuel's 1994 duty logs, they found he had altered his shift on the exact day of the explosion and left the station just before the body arrived for identification. The duty roster was also edited 2 days later, again by Samuel. All the connections led to one picture. Samuel Cole had created a fake death to make Franklin Cole disappear completely from federal databases. Once the death certificate was validated, every federal agency stopped pursuing him. No one rechecked afterward. No one suspected. No one cross-verified DNA, because in 1994 DNA was not yet widely used for body identification. Franklin Cole, the interstate child abductor who took Peter nearly 2,000 miles, had been shielded by a Toledo police officer himself. Every explanation for Cole's disappearance from 1994 onward now became heartbreakingly clear. He did not vanish because he died. He vanished because he was protected. With this discovery, the investigation shifted to a new and far more serious phase. A sophisticated abductor, knowledgeable about the law, who operated across states for half a century, was still alive somewhere. And now, with the truth exposed, the only question echoing in the FBI's special briefing room was, if he lived past 1994, where has he been for nearly 30 years? And how many other children vanished in the years he was protected by a representative of the law himself? A darker chapter of the investigation began to unfold. After the truth about the staged death was exposed, the federal investigation team shifted to a new task, tracing Franklin Cole's movements after 1994. The journal showed he was still writing and active at least a year after the date records claimed he had died. But where did he go? Based on his past movement patterns, the FBI built a predictive model for his escape route after Samuel Cole staged the fake death. Cole would leave Ohio immediately, avoid the Midwest, and head to areas with high transient populations where a new identity could blend into the community. From old transport data, the name San Antonio, Texas, emerged as the most likely destination. A city always bustling with trucks, where thousands of long-haul drivers passed through each month without anyone noticing. When the FBI scanned rental and tax records in San Antonio from 1995 to 2005, they began looking for middle-aged men using fake names who appeared in the database briefly, then vanished. Analysts identified a recurring name in several small transactions. Franklin Jameson, a man who rented a room in South San Antonio from 1996 to 2001. No ID beyond a cheap auto insurance card. No employment records. No driver's license in the Texas DMV system. A man who barely existed. But what caught the investigation team's attention was the landlord's statement. When the FBI inquired, he was quiet, avoided contact. But the thing I remember most is, I once saw him living with a child around 8 or 9 years old. The kid didn't go to school, didn't socialize. Then one day, he was gone. The man moved out right after that. That statement made everyone freeze. A strange child, appearing and disappearing over a few years, matching the behavioral pattern other states had suspected Cole was involved in. When the FBI tracked down others who lived in the same complex, an elderly female neighbor confirmed. He called the boy by a strange name, Mikey or Miko or something. The kid rarely went outside. We thought it was his grandson, but no one ever saw papers, and no one saw the boy's mother. Another person remembered the boy was afraid of loud noises. flinching every time a truck passed on the road, exactly the reaction described by the Arizona nurse in 1972 about Peter when he was left at the hospital. Information kept pouring in. A truck driver who lived nearby said he had run into Mr. Jameson a few times. The man said Cole, if it really was him, often fixed his own truck, avoiding all conversation. The driver also remembered the man had a long scar on his right hand. When the FBI reviewed old photos of Cole from his younger years, they saw exactly such a scar. From a warehouse accident in 1967. From there, the FBI requested a search of the old house Franklin Jameson had rented. The current owner admitted throwing out most of the previous tenants' belongings, but had kept a small box of miscellaneous items in storage because it looked important. When the FBI opened the box, they found no journal or papers, but in the corner was a nylon bag containing a few strands of gray hair mixed with darker hair. This was a golden opportunity. The FBI forensics lab immediately extracted DNA from the recovered hair strands. Initial results showed they belonged to two different people, an adult male and a child. When the adult male's DNA sample was run through the system, a match appeared almost instantly. 98.4% similarity to the DNA sample stored from items in the Barstow garage, confirmed as Franklin Cole's. No margin of error, no mistake. The man living under the name Franklin Jameson in San Antonio was Franklin Cole, still alive, still changing identities, still continuing his life on the run. The second DNA sample from the child who lived with him posed a major question. When compared to the Texas Missing Children database from 1990 to 2005, no records matched. No one reported missing, no one searched, no child with matching genetics. An unnamed child, no records, living with Cole for years, then disappearing. Those who lived nearby described that in mid-2001, the child was no longer seen. One neighbor remembered asking Cole, "Where's the boy?" Cole only replied in a flat, emotionless voice, "He's being taken care of better somewhere else." After that statement, the man disappeared for a few weeks, leaving the rental empty. With DNA confirming Franklin Jameson's true identity, the San Antonio investigation team immediately traced back utility, water, credit, and city camera records from 1996-2005. Results showed Cole moved in a very familiar pattern, staying in one spot for a few years, then vanishing before records were scrutinized or neighbors started asking questions. Data from the power company revealed something else. 3 months before Cole left the apartment in 2001, electricity usage spiked, as if someone was running machines all night. No one knew what it meant, but to the investigation team, it was a sign that something unusual may have happened right before Cole and the child disappeared from the neighborhood. Now, DNA evidence had brought Cole from an invisible shadow back to a living person out there somewhere. A man who once abducted Peter, left him in Arizona, hid under a fake death, and was now proven to have lived with another child. The final question raised in the FBI briefing room in San Antonio that night was one everyone feared saying aloud. If Peter as a child had been kept by Cole for many months before being abandoned in Arizona, what became of the child who lived with him in Texas? A large-scale manhunt officially began. Cole had left his DNA behind, meaning he was no longer a ghost. Now, he was just a flesh-and-blood man, and the target of a federal hunt. From the San Antonio file, the name Franklin Jameson was not the only trace Cole left behind. Among the renters in the surrounding area, there was one witness the FBI had not yet reached when investigating the child who once lived with Cole. Margaret Cole, a woman in her 60s, a distant paternal relative, who had moved back to live in Kerrville, Texas in the early 2000s. Old residency lists showed she had appeared at the same address as Cole for about a year. The FBI headed to Kerrville immediately. Margaret lived in a small, discreet house at the end of a narrow dirt road. When the investigators knocked, she looked at them with an impassive gaze, as if she had been waiting for this day for a long time. No resistance, no evasion. Margaret only said one thing: "You're here because of Frank." In the outdated living room, she sat down on a wooden chair and began to speak, her voice steady but laced with a weariness that seeped into every word. She admitted she had lived with Cole for a short time after 1995, when he had just returned from Ohio. No one knew about the fake death at the time, and Margaret did not explain why Cole had sought her out, only that the family always had someone to help him, a little from each generation. When the FBI asked about the child who had lived with Cole in San Antonio, Margaret closed her eyes for a long moment, then replied, "Frank always wanted a child. But he didn't want a wife, didn't want a family. He said women just complicated things. He wanted a child like something he owned. A child that was only his." That confession made the room thicken like congealed air. "Did you know about Peter Graham?" the investigator asked directly. Margaret looked up. "I knew there was a child from Ohio. He called him the boy at the oak tree. I didn't know his real name, but he said he was the only one who didn't cry when hearing engines. I think he loved him." In his own way, the investigator turned the 1971 photo of Peter toward her. Margaret looked at it for a long time. Her emotion was neither guilt nor fear, just like someone facing something she already knew. "Yes, that's him." The FBI asked why she never reported to the police, even knowing Cole had abducted a child. Margaret answered slowly, as if wading through the mud of memory. "Frank told me the child had no one left, that his family didn't love him, that he saved him from drowning in the lake. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Frank always said things that made people think he was right." But then the investigator brought up a key fact. Daniel Harper Peter had been found alive in Arizona in 1972. Margaret's face paled. "No, he said he was gone," she whispered. "He said he was weak, couldn't handle the journey." The FBI now understood clearly. Margaret had not just lived with Cole, she held a piece of the picture no one had ever known. "Do you know how many children he took?" Margaret shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. "He didn't say. But I know he sought out children, from families who didn't pay attention. He chose the quiet ones. He didn't like children who cried. He said he only wanted the perfect child that he could raise alone, no one asking questions, no one taking him back." An investigator placed the photo of the child from the Gallup Polaroid on the table. Margaret leaned down, examined it closely. Her expression softened, then hardened. "I've seen this boy before," she admitted. "Not in Texas. Back then, Frank kept this photo in his wallet. He said he was good, but not suitable. I didn't understand. He said he had to leave him behind. I didn't dare ask what that meant." That was the first time someone directly involved confirmed the child in the Polaroid was another victim, not Peter. When the FBI moved to the most important question, "Did you ever see Peter while living with Cole in Texas?" Margaret did not answer immediately. She placed a hand on her forehead, breathing heavily like someone forced to recall what she most wanted to forget. "No," she said, her voice breaking. "Not in Texas, but I heard him say, 'The first child will never find me.' I didn't understand then, but now." She stopped, looking straight into the investigator's eyes. "Frank didn't want to acknowledge his existence. He told me never to mention it. He said what happened in Ohio wasn't real anymore." That testimony confirmed what the investigation team had feared. Margaret had known Peter existed, and had stayed silent for decades, contributing to covering up the abduction journey. When the FBI collected DNA from Margaret's drinking glass, the results were clear. She had a distant blood relation to Cole, but no DNA relation to the child who had lived with Cole in San Antonio, meaning that child was not family, just another victim. The interrogation ended when Margaret slumped into the chair, hands covering her face, saying one thing that made the entire team noted in the report. Frank didn't want a family. He wanted children, but didn't want anyone to have the right to take them from his hands. I let him believe he could do that. And now, I don't know where those children went. Margaret's silence over the years, her unconscious protection of Cole, now became the final piece proving he never acted alone, and that the children around his life might be more than anyone dared imagine. As the year turned to late 2023, the investigation spanning more than half a century finally reached the stage where all the scattered fragments could be pieced together into a unified picture. From the journal entries buried under the Barstow garage floor, the rotted fuel receipts, the forgotten witness statements, to modern DNA analysis, everything fit into a coherent story that was chillingly seamless. Franklin Cole was the one who took Peter Graham from Maumee Bay on the morning of September 18, 1971. One of the most shocking discoveries was Cole's description of changing clothes to mislead in his journal. He wrote, "Striped shirt off. New shirt on. Easier this way." This explained why the search team never found Peter's striped shirt at the scene it was in, the wooden box buried in the Barstow garage. Cole had changed Peter's clothes as soon as he pulled him into the secluded parking lot corner, ensuring that any later witnesses could not be certain they saw the missing child. From a criminology perspective, this action was a typical tactic of experienced abductors, reducing immediate identifiability from the very first minute. The cross-state route, reconstructed from real documents, Ohio, Indiana, New Mexico, Arizona, showed that Cole did not act impulsively. He knew every weakness in the law enforcement system of that era. Each state had jurisdiction only within its borders. Databases did not share information, and undocumented children could easily disappear once far enough away. The gas receipt in Lima and Fort Wayne confirmed the timing of leaving Ohio. The Terre Haute postal receipt indicated he shipped something to Gallup. The McKinley County toll station proved his truck passed exactly where the Polaroid was taken. The Phoenix repair receipt matched the timing of Peter being left at the Arizona hospital. Every independent trace aligned with the journal, a match by the hour, by the day, leaving no room for random coincidence. In Phoenix, Peter no longer remembered his name. Left by two men, as the 1972 nurse's statement recorded, the boy was admitted with a new name, Daniel Harper. The age misestimation due to malnutrition caused doctors to assess Peter as younger than his actual age, preventing his record from linking to the Ohio disappearance. Cole knew this well, and he wrote directly in the journal, "They won't know. Start over." And as he predicted, the 1972 system truly didn't know. It was not until IGG, the Investigative Genetic Genealogy Unit, began tracing Daniel's DNA in 2023 that his true identity emerged. The 48.9% match with the Graham family confirmed close blood relation. With deeper analysis, IGG built a complete family tree, placing Daniel back in his rightful position, not the unnamed child in Arizona, but Peter Graham himself, the 4-year-old who vanished from Maumee Bay in 1971. With identity confirmed by DNA, Peter became the most important living witness, even though his childhood memories had faded. His entire life was proof that Cole had abandoned him in a distant hospital to erase all traces. People had once thought Peter was dead, but in reality he had lived under a different name, in a different family, unaware he was the victim of a 52-year federal abduction. Once Peter's identity was proven, the next question was, who would face legal accountability? Cole, the mastermind, was still at large, but those who aided him were no longer outside the law. Margaret Cole's statement, combined with DNA collected from items in her home, confirmed she had lived with Cole and knew he was holding children illegally. Her knowledge of Peter's abduction without reporting it made her an accomplice under federal law. The strongest evidence was not in her confession, but in a key detail. Margaret admitted seeing the Gallup Polaroid in Cole's wallet years earlier. Something only someone living directly with him could know. And when she said Cole didn't want anyone to mention the first child and denied its existence, it inadvertently confirmed he had deliberately hidden Peter from the start. The federal indictment against Margaret included 3 charges: concealing a federal criminal, aiding an abductor and evading capture, failing to report known child abuse crimes. But most important was the nearly 300-page federal investigation conclusion, officially piecing together all the fragments into one single answer. Franklin Cole abducted Peter Graham at Maumee Bay State Park on the morning of September 18, 1971. He changed his clothes to mislead witnesses, put Peter in the truck, left Ohio within an hour, traveled cross-state along his familiar transport route, stopped in Gallup where he took the Polaroid, then abandoned Peter at a Phoenix hospital in the early morning of September 23, 1971. He continued living under false identities, protected by his relative Officer Samuel Cole through a staged death record in 1994. IGG and 2023 DNA testing confirmed Daniel Harper was Peter Graham. Cole was the sole perpetrator of the abduction, and Margaret Cole was an accomplice. On the day the report was released, the lead investigator said only one sentence: "The longest missing child case in Maumee Bay history is no longer a mystery. We know what happened, who did it, and now one final task remains: find Cole." The 52-year hunt for the abductor was not over, but the truth was now as clear as light shining straight into the darkness where Cole had hidden for half a century. When the federal investigation conclusion was released at the end of 2023, the Peter Graham case did not just close a 52-year mystery, it created an unprecedented shockwave throughout the US's legal system. The media called it the longest missing child case solved by 21st century DNA, while investigators viewed it as a warning about the fragility of law enforcement procedures against those who knew how to slip through systemic cracks. In the first month after the report, 12 missing child cases in the Midwest from Ohio, Indiana, to Michigan were reopened simultaneously. Not all were linked to Cole, but their patterns were eerily similar. A child vanishing in a short window, no clear witnesses, no physical evidence left behind, and the case closed before federal agencies were notified. The 1970s were a time when the U.S. lacked unified interstate systems. Thus, the Federal Cold Case Unit saw this as an opportunity to search for surviving victims like Peter in cases once considered hopeless. One of those 12 cases, a girl who disappeared in Indiana in 1974, yielded results just months after reopening. Through comparison with the new National DNA Database, she, now 54 years old, was living under a different name in Nevada, unaware she had once been an abduction victim. Peter Graham became the precedent, and the ripple effect of the case gave long-dormant files a new chance at light. In Ohio, where it all began, the record-keeping failures of 1971 became the most closely scrutinized issue. An internal investigation concluded that Peter's disappearance lasted so long because files were scattered, inaccurate, and worse, manipulated by insiders. The Samuel Cole case forced Ohio to confront a hard truth. Their storage and management systems had once been too easily tampered with. In December 2023, Ohio officially overhauled its entire criminal and missing persons record storage system, moving fully to digital format, requiring cross-verification with access codes, and mandating fingerprints and DNA for unidentified bodies or unclear cases. The new law also required that every child missing report be forwarded to federal agencies within 24 hours, an effort to ensure no case would fall between states, as Peter's had. The biggest change occurred at the national level. Thanks to the Peter case, IgG investigative genetic genealogy, once controversial due to DNA privacy concerns, became the standard for all new cold case investigations. The Department of Justice issued official guidelines encouraging IgG use in disappearances over 20 years old, with strict oversight and clear notification to involved parties. After Peter, no one dared underestimate the power of genetic family trees, the tool that pulled a child lost for half a century back to his real name. FBI training academies also added a course called History of Interstate Movement Behavior, analyzing criminal patterns, exploiting transport routes and interstate gaps, based directly on Cole's case files. This aimed to prevent future offenders from using cross-state highways to hide victims as Cole had done. In the Toledo community where the case began, Maumee Bay State Park quietly erected a small plaque next to the large oak tree, in memory of every child who was lost and found through truth. It did not name Peter, at his own request, but everyone knew who the plaque belonged to. The nation followed every step of the case, and when federal agencies announced that Cole was still alive and being pursued, America realized this was not just the story of one abducted child, but of a system that had once let children fall into darkness for too long. Debates erupted in Congress about child protection law reforms, federal data sharing, and local agency accountability. Finally, when summarizing the entire report, the lead investigator wrote a sentence the team read over and over. Peter Graham is not just a victim who was found. He is a reminder that unsolved cases do not die. They only wait until we have the tools to hear their voices. But the report did not end with triumph or self-satisfaction. It ended with a question no one could ignore, one that echoed through the halls of the Department of Justice, in meetings, in classrooms, and in the hearts of those who reopened dusty old files. How many more children like Peter Graham are still lying in the darkness silently for the past 50 years? No one had the answer. But America had begun the search. The story of Peter Graham, the 4-year-old abducted at Maumee Bay in 1971 and found only after 52 years, is not just a personal tragedy. It reflects the gaps in American society and reminds us of the need for vigilance, community responsibility, and transparency in the justice system. The fact that Cole changed Peter's clothes right in the parking lot to mislead witnesses shows that sometimes a child's disappearance happens in just 45 seconds of distraction. And in today's America, where parks, parking lots, and neighborhoods remain crowded, that lesson still holds. One moment of inattention can change an entire life. Cole's cross-state journey through Ohio, Indiana, New Mexico, Arizona was only possible because states did not share data back then. Today, though we have better technology, information flow between agencies can still face delays. The case reminds American citizens to push for transparency, demand closer cooperation between local and federal authorities, especially in child disappearances. IGG identifying Peter after 52 years also proves that science can correct past mistakes, but only if we dare to face them. Peter's story also reminds us that silence can be complicity. Margaret Cole knew Cole wanted a child all to himself, but she chose to believe and stay silent. In today's American society, where neighbors might see something unusual but hesitate to report, this is an important reminder. If you see something wrong, speak up. A small action by one citizen can save a child's life. Ultimately, the case gives us hope. No matter how long the time, the truth can still be found, and our responsibility is never to give up searching for it. If you believe stories like the 52-year journey to find Peter Graham again need to be told so no child is ever forgotten, please subscribe to join us in the next cases. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we continue searching for the truth for those still lying in the darkness.